Hello, welcome back to the channel. Have Roots Will Travel. My name is Lisa Ellen Soltori. I'm a genealogist and a passionate traveler. Over the last several years, I've been examining all of Les Filles du Roi and Les Filles Mariées, the King's Daughters, and the marriageable girls. Today's episode is going to focus on the marriageable girls. These are ladies that came before the King's Daughters. The King's Daughters began to arrive in 1663. Les Filles Mariées 1634 they began. Just extraordinary. And they didn't come in groups, and they didn't have a dowry, and they didn't have really anything. They just came here on a wing and a prayer, hopeful that they could start a new life. And so they did. And we are ever so grateful to them. Now, before we begin, let me show you ways you can support the channel. The first three keep you in the know. Subscribe, like, and notify. That helps all of those algorithms and all that good stuff. Then I have memberships that you can purchase on YouTube for anywhere from 99 cents to $24.99. And then we also have a PayPal button that a lot of people use either as a monthly or a one-time donation. And we also do Super Thanks, which is part of the YouTube family of things, where if you like a particular video, you can give it a super thanks. I look upon it as a tip. So every once in a while I get a tip and I'm like, oh, this is so exciting. So thank you to all of you who have participated thus far. So with that being said, let's get on with the show and get to know our next Fille Mariée. Today we're going to be looking at Les Filles Mariées, episode 147, Francoise Jacqueline Nadreau. She comes to us as a viewer request. I did not have her in my file, so let's get to know Francoise a little bit better. Francoise was born in 1641 in La Flèche, France. Her parents were Jacques Nadreau and Marie Lebrun. Now you can see that she is part of Le Pays de la Loire region, and inside that region it is the département of Sarthe, and La Flèche is right there at the bottom. And so the département in France is like a county, the Pays de la Loire is like a region, and of course it's the country of France. Now, what does this little French town called La Flèche have to do with Montreal, Canada? Believe it or not, part of a staircase from La Flèche now stands in Montreal, and that ties go back to the 1600s. That's the picture that you see there on the middle of your screen. That is from La Flèche, and they gave it to the Montreal Hospital back in I can't remember when they gave it, but it was donated, and so now it proudly stands there. La Flèche is a town in western France in the Sarthe département. Its name means arrow in France, and its history goes back all the way to Roman times. In the Middle Ages, the first lord, Jean de la Flèche, built the original castle, which was later expanded and fought over for centuries. Parts of it, rebuilt in 1450, can still be seen today with arrow marks on the stone. Can you imagine? In the 1500s, Françoise, Duchess of Alençon, grandmother of King Henry IV, lived here. Later, in 1604, Henry IV gave the castle to the Jesuits, who founded the Collège Royal Henri le Grand, a famous school where the philosopher René Descartes studied. Today, that same castle serves as the Flèche City Hall, which you see on the bottom right of your screen. The Church of Saint Thomas, first built in the 1100s, holds treasures like a 14th century Virgin Mary statue and a painting of the Virgin's Assumption by Simon Vouet from 1629. And as I've stated, La Flèche connects to Canada because of the staircase that now stands at the old Hôtel Dieu Hospital. And so, although it may be small, La Flèche, it really is filled with lots of history about castles and kings, and absolutely ties to New France. And this is the area that she would come from. After losing both parents, she would arrive in New France in 1658. Now, the groom that she would select and who would select her, his name was Michel Louvard de Desjardins, and he was born in 1623 in Saint-Coulombe, France. His parents were Etienne Louvard and Guillemine Faithful. And Saint-Coulombe was once a very small parish community just outside the bustling market town of La Flèche, and its heart was the Église Saint-Colombe, a modest parish church that served generations of families. The name itself honors Saint Colomba, an early Christian martyr venerated across France. During the early modern period, Saint Colombe would have looked much like other rural parishes, fields, and stretching to the edge of the Loire Valley, a cluster of homes, and the parish church rising as that spiritual center. In 1866, as La Flèche expanded, Saint Colombe was formally annexed into the town, losing its independent parish. But the memory lives on today. The street Rue Saint Colombe and the church site still preserve its identity within the larger city. So now, guess what? I mean, obviously they're coming from the same place. What are the odds? Pretty sure they knew each other or they were connected. So that is really, really interesting. Michel would arrive with Les Grands Recrues de 1653 of 1653. This is a group of individuals who were recruited by the governor, Paul Chamedy de Maisonneuve, and he went over to France trying desperately to save the city of Montreal because at that point it was known as Ville-Marie and it had been established in 1642 and it was not thriving. So he went over to France and said, I'm going to get 100 recruits and we're going to try to rebuild this place. And he succeeded. And one of those people was Michel, who climbed aboard and signed a contract, and they arrived in 1653. And they were given land and money and all of that in order to somehow create the Montreal that would become, and they were successful. And his name is on that plaque that is in Old Montreal. Now remember, Michel would have arrived in 1653. He would have had time to amass, land and a house and money in order to be able to provide for a potential bride. Potentially, he already knew her. And so by this time, he would have called upon her, if he did know her, and say, okay, let's get married. And so on September 23rd, 1658, they were married. And of course, they would settle at Montreal. Let's talk about Montreal. I've already mentioned that Montreal started off in 1642 as Ville-Marie by the founder, Paul de Chamedy, Sœur de Maisonneuve, and was essentially just a missionary center. I want to draw your attention to this map on the bottom left. See how it is an island. The island of Montreal could be attacked on all levels. And the people of Trois-Rivières and Quebec City just thought, who would go and live there, essentially? And it was kind of a folly, it was one of those, it was looked upon as just, okay, they want to do this thing, that sort of thing. But Paul de Chamedy, to his credit, really believed in it and kept persevering. And one of the reasons why it was such a problematic thing is that you could literally attack it from all sides. So the natives and Indians, which were a big concern at that time, it was very, very challenging for anyone who was living in Montreal at that time. And you can see the Vieux Montréal, which is part of that, the essence of Montreal, if you will. When you walk the streets and are there, you really feel a sense of déjà vu, like it's as if you've stepped back in time. Now, in that Grand Recru that I talked about, one of the people that came was Marguerite Bourgeois, and she would go on to found the Notre Dame Congregation. And this artist illustration is what the church looked like back then, and probably not even as nice as, this is probably later on. after her time. But now Notre-Dame, Basilica de Montréal, de Notre-Dame, that is an amazing place. So absolutely, 400 years later, here we are, basically dealing, looking at something where people have truly sacrificed in order for Montreal to exist. And exist it does. Now, this little picture of it actually is from a museum, and I have the link to the museum. Just a fabulous artist illustration of what the fort of Ville-Marie might have looked like. And of course, now it's the mighty Montreal. The skyline of Montreal is like any beautiful city, and you can see it's right next to the St. Lawrence River, which is absolutely, that is the defining river of Quebec, really. And so Montreal really truly is an extraordinary city, and Françoise and Michel were part of those pioneers. Now, one terrible night in June of 1662, so they had been married about 4 years, Michel was killed by natives who apparently had been drinking. In fact, Michel's death was likely the push they needed to pass an ordinance for not selling alcohol to the Indians. This had been an issue for quite some time, and we can surmise that this at least was something positive that came out of this extraordinary tragedy. And so now Françoise was left alone. The next man who would come into her life was Michel André de Saint-Michel, born 1639. In La Cam, France is where he was from. His parents were Richard André and Jeanne Poirier. La Cam is a small parish in Normandy with a history far bigger than its size. At its heart, it stands the Église Notre-Dame de la Cam, built in the 12th century, where generations were baptized and married and buried. For centuries, life here was rooted in farming and faith, its parish records preserving the names of ordinary villagers. But La Cam is also tied to world history, because in 1944, during the Battle of Normandy, fierce fighting scarred the village. Today, it is home to the largest German war cemetery in France, where more than 21,000 soldiers rest. It's a place of reflection, where medieval bells and modern memory meet. La Cam reminds us that even the quietest villages can carry stories that reach across centuries. So it really is an amazing place that he comes from. If you are a descendant, this is truly a place for you to visit. Now, it was about a year after her husband had died, which is actually, a long period of time. Now, remember, she didn't have any children. So that was probably one of the things she could wait, in other words. And June 19th, 1663 is when they were married at Montreal. When we think of Montreal today, we imagine that very big city, but in the 1600s, it was still just a very small colony, which we discussed was under constant threat. To protect it, Governor Maisonneuve set up outposts along the edges of the island. One of these outposts was at the Lachine Rapids, a dangerous but strategic spot. And in 1665, Maisonneuve offered land there to men who agreed to defend it. The settlement became known as the Côte des Argoulets, a name that meant good shooters. It was a frontier community where families lived under military discipline while trying to farm and survive. In 1671, another leader, Zachary Dupuis, was given a fief near Sault Saint Louis and Lachine. He named it Verdun, after a village in his home region of France. Over the next years, the place was sometimes called Côte Saint Louis, Côte de la Rivière Saint Pierre, or Verdun, but all referred to the same growing settlement. Of course, life in Verdun was not easy. Families faced raids from the Iroquois, the rough currents of the nearby river, and the challenge of clearing the land. But the soil along that Rivière Saint Pierre made it good farmland, and this is where Michel and Françoise would settle. and they would join a community of tavern keepers and farmers and soldiers' families who also knew the danger they were in. Now, this is a very important part of the story because places them in a particular spot, and as the story continues, you will see why. In 1681 census, we have Michel André Tannard, which is a man who works with leather and animal hides and turns it into leather. Francoise is his wife. Their children are Gertrude, Jeanne, Philippe, Petronille, Marguerite, Marie, Angelique, and they have one domestic, 34 years old, Jean. They have one gun, 11 bêtes à cornes, so that's 11 goats or horned, any animal that's horned, and 16 arpents valeurs, which is about 13 to 14 acres of land. They would go on to have 10 children. Marie Gertrude would die in infancy. The second Marie Gertrude would marry François Philippon, but did not leave any descendants. Catherine would pass away at the age of 5. Jeanne would marry Jean-Michel, but would not leave any descendants. Philippe would become an engagé, but as far as I know, no descendants. Petronille would pass away at the age of 15. Marguerite would marry twice. First to François Villemet and would have 7 children, all of whom made it to adulthood. And then to Jean-François Dubois and would have 2 children, both of whom would survive. Jean-François' mother was Fille du Roi Anne Julienne Dumont, who we have profiled in episode 129, and I have linked it I've got the link in the notes, the show notes for you. And then we have Marie, who would pass away at 11 years of age, Marie Angelique, who would die at 9 years of age, and Louise Madeleine, who would pass away in infancy. Now, let us see. This is very, very tragic. As you can see, this is just unbearable tragedy that is consuming her, but she keeps going. Throughout the 1680s, Françoise would, with her husband's approval, go into business with Vincent Dugas de La Fontaine and was quite successful. And despite everything that was occurring around her life, she did eventually get into trouble, as most women who were businesswomen at that time. The priest had an issue with her, and he filed a complaint, basically calling her, sort of a brothel owner. She called her adulteress. He called her, someone who did bad things and all sorts of nonsense, really. And they accused her of selling alcohol against the law and even of prostituting her daughter. I mean, it just went on and on. She was cleared of most of those charges. But the court ruled that she could not be part of the business, but her husband and Vincent could carry on. Just incredible. So that's March of 1689. And the final tragedy. She would pass away in the Lachine massacre of August 5th, 1689, where 1,500 Indians attacked the very unprotected town of Lachine. Her husband and 4 children would pass away in that massacre. One of her children actually made it back, and that is the one who actually kept the line going. So you can imagine, if you are a descendant of this woman, that means that there's only one of her children that you could be descended from, as far as we know. That is a remarkable thing. She and Michel were married for 26 years at that time. And it's just absolutely, everyone who knows about Montreal history knows about this extraordinary attack and how it took the lives of so many filles du roi, filles mariées, many, many, many people. And let's turn to another slide that will tell you about how they remember the victims. So in Lachine, there is a monument at the cemetery. There's an indication of the Lachine massacre. Let me read it to you. During the night of the 4th through the 5th of August, 1689, 1,500 Iroquois landed at Lachine and placed themselves in small groups near all the houses along the shore. At a given signal, the massacre began. 200 persons perished and 120 were taken into captivity. The year 1689 was long known as the year of the massacre. And here you have Michel André, Francoise Nadreau, Marie-André, Marguerite, Petronille, and these are people, they were captive. Marguerite was a captain until 1698, where she was able to be freed and then would ultimately marry and have those children. Just an extraordinary. Now the man Petronille had married a man named Charles. He also died. And Gertrude André, she was also married to a man named François Philippon, and all of these people were not found. And so when you go back on when I was depicting all of the different times, and it ended in 1689, that's why it did. So this is truly, truly a tragedy. I've done victims of the Lachine massacre before, but not quite to this level. Really, really terrible event. There is a link to a article on and I posted it here. It's a genealogy.org article about the Lachine massacre. And she was 48 years old. She would only leave 27 descendants. So if you are a descendant, obviously this is a big deal. So just extraordinary that the line would have continued. Just amazing. So further research, always a good thing. We have Les Filles du Roi, Pionnières de Montréal in French. I've given you the link to that. And then The Women of Ville Marie, available on Amazon in English. And Susan McNally, who I've talked a great deal about, extraordinary writer and researcher who I've gotten to know very well. Absolutely phenomenal book. I would recommend that I provided the link for the Amazon. You can get it Kindle or I believe in paperback. And absolutely have a look at that. This is a truly, truly extraordinary. I remember in one of the other videos that I've been doing today, I was talked about a movie. This is like a mini series. And just extraordinary woman, extraordinary life, and absolutely tragic ending. But what she gave us, and the resilience and the strength and all of that, was just remarkable. And to be so strong and so brave, even during these times, was just a remarkable feat. If you are a descendant of this woman, oh my goodness, you can kind of puff out and say, yeah, we did it our way. And absolutely amazing woman. So thank you for gracing our shores, Françoise. You are a woman of substance, bar none, and we are ever, ever so thankful for your presence at New France. And I am ever so grateful for my patrons and supporters and subscribers, because you really, truly help me to know that what I'm doing matters. And I appreciate you, each and every one of you, every note, every comment on a video. I read them all, and I try to respond as much as possible as time allocates. But thank you ever so much for what you have done for me. So thank you. And with that being said, until I see you on the next episode, I will say au revoir.